All right, let's get to 7 and 8, and then we'll wrap this thing up and put a bow on it. Let's go to the 7 spot case.
Yeah, first, before I start talking about these two teams, I want to say that I don't think there's a bad team in this division.
Agreed.
Simply said.
No lottery teams, I don't think.
No.
Like, I don't think there's a bad team here. I think the next two teams just fall, victim to this division. And I do have Detroit next because I think they're another team that could be a shocker and then just absolutely surprise us this year. They really needed to address the goal scoring this year, and they did that. They did exactly that in bringing in DeBrincat. And I think it was Dylan Larkin has only played with one player that's had more than 60 points in his career, and that was Bertuzzi. So having some support on his wing is going to be huge. And I mean, they brought in a lot of guys, including JT Compher, who had a breakout season last year, and I became a big fan of. And there's a lot of guys that they added in the past. I think why a lot of pundits and including us are so sheepish on this team is they have shuffled the deck in the last 2 years. They brought in a ton of players 2 off seasons ago and a ton of players this off season. So it's tough to get a gauge of what team this is going to be. The back end is a little concerning for me. Probably the real concern here. I've grown to have a lot of respect for Jake Wallman. I think he has become one of those premier defensive defensemen in the league. So putting him with Moritz is a fantastic pair that you're going to see a lot of this year because they're going to log a ton of minutes. And then it's kind of a lot of the island of misfit toys, really, on the back end when it comes to Sherratt and Petrie and Hole. I won't count Gostisbehere in there, but maybe you can. So we'll see what type of decor that is in the end. And then goaltending, you have 2 guys that have had some random standout seasons and then lack consistency. So if they can both be the same as they were in those big seasons, then hey, great tandem. But that's what I'm saying is it's just this team is flip a coin for me.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me with Detroit. I don't feel bad putting them in the number 7 spot because I feel like a lot of the players that you mentioned, especially on the back end and in net, that is, I mean, I think they thought Husso was better when they signed him, and I think they thought the team was better when they made some of these signings, but I feel like a lot of these players actually could be good stopgaps because they still have so many young guys over the next couple years who could potentially crack this lineup and make a difference. Because if I look at this team, that's the one thing that's missing. It's star power. Outside of a Larkin, and a Moritz Seider, you've got your Lucas Raymond, but then after that, I guess you've got your DeBrincat now. But in terms of homegrown star power, that's what they lack. And I feel like they have a plethora of that still upcoming. That's why I don't feel bad about putting Detroit in the number 7 spot. But with all that being said, I don't know what Yzerman is doing anymore. I used to believe in this plan, but this just feels like a random assortment of players. I get adding a guy as a stopgap, waiting for a player to eventually make the team, especially in net with a first-round pick, Sebastian Kosa. But to me, it feels like they almost did too much. There's too much turnover. There's too many new faces. There's a lack of identity here, which I think is never good, especially on a rebuilding team. And it almost feels like they thought they would be good by now, but then panicked a little bit, added some other players around the league to contracts that aren't exactly, great contracts and are sort of taking up space for the future instead of really, focusing on maybe one player or drafting and developing players and just waiting another couple years. It almost feels like 2 rebuilds have happened here. The first one, then they panicked, and now they added a bunch of guys, and now we're starting the second one where they're waiting on the players they drafted last year and the year before. So I don't know. This team is structured really weirdly for me. I think they're going to be good at some point. I just don't think it's going to be this season. But that being said, I could be totally surprised because DeBrincat could come in here, score 50 goals, and drag this team to the playoffs.
Yeah, Chad, I know exactly what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying about the Red Wings. Now, talking about Yzerman for a second, I think that it was really smart of him to recognize that at the deadline last year, where, you know, they were kind of in the mix and in the fight for a wild card spot, he decided to sell off because he recognized that, you know what, we're not quite there yet looking at our pieces, and we need to continue to keep drafting and developing. And I think that, you know, it was good for them to have 2 first-round picks again and take Danielson and Sandin Pellikka and continue to add to that prospect pool, because the main reason why this Detroit team is behind Buffalo and Ottawa is because their younger players, their high picks, have not taken that step that the younger players and the high picks have taken on the Buffaloes and the Ottawas. And so that is the concern for me. Obviously, you've got Sider and Larkin, but, you know, who is going to be their Tim Stützle? Who's going to be their Tage Thompson? Who's going to be that one guy to really take that huge step forward on this team? And that is what separates them from Buffalo and Ottawa. And I agree as well that, you know, they've made a lot of signings. They've given out a lot of term to these veterans. There's some risk. Andrew Kopp didn't exactly have a great season last year. JT Compher got a big 5-year deal, you know, coming off a career season. Who knows how that's going to go? Justin Hall, don't really understand that deal on the back end. How is Shane Gostisbehere going to fit in? We know he was great in Arizona, but, I mean, didn't exactly fit in that well in Carolina, and who knows how he's going to fit in Detroit. And so Yzerman has had to add so many of these veteran players because those younger players that they expected to take spots on this roster haven't done so yet. And that is the concern with this team, and that's why I have them behind Buffalo and Ottawa and in the 7th spot.
Well, and Filip Zadina is a perfect example of a player who they thought was going to be able to take a spot, but just wasn't able to. And now he's in San Jose this year, so that'll be...
Yeah.
I hope he fills their net, as he would say.
I hope he wins the Calder at 25.